The day my hearing returned, I stood in my own hallway and learned what silence had protected me from. My daughter's voice, sweet when performed, sharp when unobserved, carried through the vent like a blade. "He's just a burden now," she said, planning my removal from the home her mother and I built, board by board. In an instant, gratitude curdled into a cold, steady clarity. Love without boundaries had turned me into someone else's asset. I didn't shout. I listened, counting every word like evidence, because the only way back to dignity wasn't rage, it was consent, paper, and a plan. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Fog sat low over Camden Harbor like a shawl, fraying at the edges, where gulls stitched white arcs through the morning. Halyards ticked against masts in a syncopated clatter I could feel in my sternum. Salt rode the air, bright and metallic, and the cedar shingles of my house drank it in as if they had pores. For 3 weeks I had moved through all this as if behind glass, seeing the world but never hearing it. Today the glass broke. My name is Edward Hale, though everyone in town calls me Ned. I am 67, a widower of 3 years, and a man who keeps lists the way other people keep lucky coins. The Navy taught me that. Avionics crews live by checklists, and the habit never left. In a drawer by the door, Irene's grocery pad still waits with her neat block letters on a half-finished list for lemons and twine. The pad stays there the way her tube radio stays on the bookcase. Not as a shrine exactly, more like a compass that still points to something true. 3 weeks ago, an air compressor at the boatyard kicked and popped like a bad ignition, then went off with a flat, punishing crack. After that, nothing. I watched Raphael's mouth move and saw Lila's eyebrows knit, but their words were gone, pulled out to sea. People are kind when they think you can't hear. They lean closer, they over-enunciate, and they narrate your day as if reading to a child. It's meant well. It also lays a quiet over everything that feels heavier than silence. At the clinic this morning, Dr. Priya Kapoor guided me through the sound booth and the headphones and the sweep of tones like distant whistles. A heart monitor on the wall kept its steady metronome, and when it landed in my ear, beep, pause, beep, it was as if someone cracked a window in February and let the air in. I could hear her sleeve whisper against her coat when she reached for the chart, the faint rasp of pen on paper, the dry exhale of the HVAC. "Congratulations, Ned," she said. "Your thresholds are back to normal across the range. Go slow the first few days while your brain recalibrates." "Thank you, doctor," I managed, surprised at the shape of my own voice after its long layoff. It sounded older than I remembered and steadier than I felt. Outside the exam room, I paused just to listen. Elevator cables humming, a cart squeaking, a baby hiccuping down the hall, somebody laughing at a joke I didn't catch. The ordinary world, loud and gorgeous. I drove home in the old pickup Irene loved because its heater worked faster than any newer truck we ever tested. The fan belt sang its thin high note. AM radio drifted in and out, static sifting across a Sinatra song she used to hum while shelling peas. Gravel cracked under the tires when I turned onto Bay Road. Buoy bells counted a slow measure out past the breakwater, and somewhere a diesel winch clattered as if pulling the morning up hand over hand. Every sound landed with a little shock of gratitude, like the first hot coffee after a storm knocks out the power. The house sat where it always sat, shouldering the wind on the knoll above the water. Hydrangeas along the porch had hung onto a handful of papery blossoms, winter ghosts of summer bloom. The weather vane clicked twice and steadied. Through the front window I could see Irene's tube radio reflecting the lighthouse blink. 6 seconds on, 6 off. like a heartbeat you could time your breath by. I parked and let my hands rest on the wheel, not ready to break the moment. Inside, my life is tidy because order calms the chop. The brass model of a Fresnel lens I polish at the Lighthouse Museum sits centered on the mantel. The coil of hemp rope by the back door still smells faintly of tar. In the evenings, I brew tea, wipe the dust from Irene's radio, and let the dial glow butter yellow while I watch the light sweep the bay. It is a ritual, and rituals hold you together when tides try to pull you apart. Family is its own kind of weather. Lila, my daughter, moved in late last winter to help while you're getting your feet back, she said, and Raphael came along with a toolbox and a readiness to improve things. They are attentive in a way that looks good from the street. Appointments kept, pills counted, cars topped off with gas. I am grateful for the coverage, even as I miss the sound of a house that makes room for one man to talk to his thoughts. My son Aaron calls from Denver on Sundays to tell me about reinforced concrete and to hear me talk about fish that got away. He says he will come out once his project is buttoned up. I tell him there's a spare room and plenty of chowder bowls. The moment Dr. Kapoor said normal, I knew I would keep it to myself for a few hours. Surprise is a small private holiday, and I wanted to spend it at home. I wanted to stand on the porch and call Lila's name, to hear her answer rise up the stairs, to feel the house answer back the way old houses do, with a small tremor through the floorboards. I wanted to walk the rooms and reacquaint myself with how they sound. The hinge of the cellar door, the lazy tick of the kitchen clock, the sigh the furnace makes when it catches. On the drive into town, the road narrowed between salt marsh and the backs of clapboard houses. A blue heron lifted off like a slow prayer. The harbor opened by degrees, masts, then hulls, then the flat plain of water tilting like polished pewter. A pair of boys in red parkas dragged a skiff up the ramp, their boots clapping hollow on the planks. I rolled down the window just to hear it. You don't realize how many pieces your world has until their names return to you all at once. I parked behind the lilac hedge and climbed the 3 porch steps, feeling the give and creak I'd been meaning to shore up since October. The key fit the lock with the remembered scrape. Somewhere in the house, a floor register clicked. I held the knob and waited, not for any big revelation, only for the small alignment that happens when you and a place you love come back into phase. Dignity isn't a speech, it's this: knowing where you are. Knowing that the table leg with the nick in it will always snag your pant cuff if you don't lift your knee that extra inch. People talk about independence like it's a flag you plant. For me, it has always been a set of checkpoints. The list by the door, the coffee set the night before, the museum keys in the dish, the good screwdriver in the top drawer where it belongs. The weeks without sound loosened those knots, and I drifted farther than I liked. Today, I meant to pull the lines in, coil them properly, and lay them where a hand in the dark could find them. I turned the knob. From the harbor, the buoy bell marked another slow measure. The lighthouse blinked and went dark and blinked again. I set a hand against the wood to steady myself and for a breath listened only to the quiet hum of a house waiting for its people to speak. The latch eased beneath my palm and the door breathed inward an inch, just enough for warm kitchen air to slide down the hall like steam. The house had its own weather. It carried smells and sounds on little currents you could learn the way a helmsman learns tides. Butter and dish soap rode one eddy. On another came voices. Familiar at first, then strange because of what they were saying and how they were saying it. My name, said without fondness, drifted across the hardwood like grit. I froze with one foot on the rug, my shoulder angled against the jamb the way you brace a door against a sudden gust. After 3 weeks of silence, the first sounds I heard at home should have been a blessing. Instead, they arrived like broken glass. The house's acoustics gathered them helpfully. The kitchen vent carried Lila's words. The half-open parlor door caught Raphael's and smoothed the edges so they carried clean. The refrigerator's soft motor thrummed behind everything, steady as a bass line I could not ignore. "He's becoming a burden," Lila said, and I could hear the little exhale she made on the B, an old habit from childhood when she had to push hard to blow out stubborn birthday candles. Raphael answered with a shrug in his voice, already heading toward logistics. "Seabreeze Harbor Care has a room. Dr. Nolan Pierce can do the at-home cognitive evaluation this week. We should list the house while the summer folks are still sniffing." Silverware tapped ceramic. Paper slid on wood. With a sale at the top end, the restaurant in Portland isn't a dream anymore. The sentence hit me in the chest the way cold water does, from ribs to spine, a clamp. Sound, which had just been returned to me, turned traitor and sharpened their syllables like hooks. I tightened my grip on the knob until the metal remembered my handprint. A part of me wanted to walk straight in and say Lila's name just to hear it ring off the cabinets. Another part, older, trained by flight lines and checklists, said stand fast. You don't step onto a moving belt without knowing where it throws. I let the voices do their work while I stood in a patch of hallway sunlight that had warmed the floorboard to the exact temperature of Irene's palm when she rested her hand on my wrist. Lila made soothing noises that didn't match the words. "For his safety," she said, drawing the phrase out like ribbon. "He leaves burners on. He forgets. He needs structure." I closed my eyes and counted backward through the last month. Every burner checked twice, every breaker labeled, every pillbox square ticked at breakfast. It is a curious thing to hear a version of yourself narrated as if you were a fable, cautioning others away from cliffs you have never visited. Numbers rose unbidden, the way they do when you have kept books long enough. Tuition I paid when scholarships ran short, a wedding deposit when the venue moved the date, the down payment on their starter condo when rates spiked for one wild season. I didn't resent the spending when I made it. Love was the line item that balanced everything. Hearing Lila's voice round my life into a fungible asset scraped something raw I had thought age had already sanded smooth. In the vent, I could hear a spoon on a mug, the kind of domestic clink that usually tugs a smile out of me. It sounded now like a metronome timing the sail of a life. Raphael pivoted to campaign talk, as if I were a town to be persuaded. If Dr. Pierce recommends a placement, it makes the paperwork simple. We can talk to a broker about staging, paint the porch, refinish the floors, flip it to the Boston crowd, and use the equity to open shop by Memorial Day. He said shop as if he could already smell the fryers. I pictured my porch stripped of salt and history, staged in washed cotton neutrals Irene would have called nice in that way she had when she meant bland. The house did not mind paint. Houses like ours have worn all kinds of coats. What it minded was being written out of its own story while it was still warm. My hearing, the gift I had planned to unwrap slowly, room by room, became a tool I did not know I would need. There are advantages to being underestimated. People will speak plainly in front of a man they think cannot hear, as if words vanish when they leave their mouths. The Navy taught me to use the instruments I had. I stood still and made an instrument of the hall. The vent became a listening post. The seam where runner rug met floorboard marked a sweet spot in the sound. Familiar domestic noise turned map and compass. Irene's voice crossed the years as clearly as if she'd just stepped out for parsley. "Keep your eyes open, Ned, even when your heart wants to close them." She had said it after a different disappointment, a smaller one that felt big at the time. I kept my eyes open now and let my heart do what it needed to do. Ache, mostly, and then settle into something harder and calmer. I knew too well how easy it is for outrage to look like action and accomplish nothing. Action, in my life, started with a pencil and a plan. So I decided not to speak. I let the surprise I had imagined dissolve without ceremony and put another plan in its place. I would keep the hearing to myself until I understood the shape of the ground. I would observe, I would collect dates and phrases. I would treat this house like a vessel in uncertain water, sounding carefully before each move. Pretending to be deaf was a humiliation I had not budgeted for this morning, but it was also ballast. It would keep me steady long enough to read the current. They kept talking in the kitchen, and the house handed their talk to me, line by line. My pulse slowed. The refrigerator clicked off, and in the small quiet between compressor cycles, I heard the city clock down the street count the hour. The buoy bell out in the harbor answered, lazy and grave. The light in the lighthouse window winked, 6 on, 6 off, as reliable as it was last night and will be tomorrow. Sanctuaries can be contested without surrendering their character. A harbor remains a harbor even when rumor says otherwise. I stepped backward the way you step off a dock, heel first, then toe, measuring. In another life, I might have marched into the kitchen and demanded respect. In this life, the one I have left, I want more than victory. I want the truth arranged in a way that will stand in daylight. I eased the door shut to its original angle, added a touch of performance to my gait, and prepared to enter my own house as the man everyone believed me to be. The plan would be quiet. The plan would be patient. I would chart every bearing before setting my course across these suddenly troubled waters. I practiced the routine at the threshold, heavier footfalls, a puzzled tilt of the head, the notebook ready like a passport, and stepped into my own kitchen as if crossing a border. The room met me with scrubbed sunshine and the citrus sting of dish soap. Lila smiled too wide and moved her mouth as if rowing, then slid a sticky note across the table. Tea, rest, pills checked. Raphael pitched his voice a notch too loud, testing whether simple instructions reached me. I stayed inside the performance, letting my gaze drift and my hands move a beat behind the room's rhythm. If humiliation was the toll, time was the road I meant to buy. Performance has weight. Every delayed heartbeat of response added ounces I would have to carry later. To balance the load, I watched their tells. Lila's palm lingered on my shoulder a second too long, a cue more than comfort. Raphael's eyes flicked to the hallway camera, habit not thought. A glossy brochure peered from beneath Irene's recipe book, its edge the blue of institutional optimism. The caption smiled, Sea Breeze Harbor Care. On the wall calendar behind it, a date wore a red ring like a target. I pointed at the kettle and raised my eyebrows like a man consulting a clouded compass. Lila wrote another note, lemon or mint, and I circled mint as if choosing between penny candy jars. She seemed relieved to be useful. Raphael pointed toward the back door and waited for the hinge squeak. I let him have it. Pride is a luxury. Time is an asset. I chose the asset. Excused with a grateful nod, I drifted past the parlor doorway to the seam of air where the house gathers voices like surf. The floor register hummed its single familiar note, and through it their words came whole. Thursday for Dr. Nolan Pierce to run an at-home cognitive screen. Saturday to tour the facility, framed as a pleasant outing with lemonade on folding tables. Raphael unrolled a sequence the way contractors unroll plans, evaluation, placement recommendation, broker call, fast paint, staging list while the summer crowd still sniffs. None of it sounded like care. All of it sounded like schedule. Numbers organized shock, so I sat at Irene's desk and lifted the labeled folders that held our ordinary history. Tuition overage, penciled in when scholarships ran short. Wedding deposit with the weekend surcharge underlined. Starter condo bridge, smaller on paper than it felt in the hand. 2 emergency car repairs, one on a freezing night when the alternator died. I totaled them in margins the way a ship's log collects small seas. I was not building a grievance. I was testing my fear that I had been reduced to equity in a plan I hadn't written. On a fresh page, I started an incident diary, 12:42 p.m., placement, 12:49, broker. I recorded the calendar date, the Seabreeze contact, the extension printed under a smiling nurse. I added a safety sweep to answer the tale of my supposed confusion. Knobs off, breakers labeled, pillbox squares filled, coffee maker unplugged, space heater stowed, front steps salted. Facts do not love you back, but they stand where you put them, and they do not blush. Aaron's name glowed on my phone like a porch light. I dialed, listened to rebar and deadlines in his voice, and told him I was fine and would call later with better news. It hurt to leave it there. A witness steadies a man. but a case depends on timing, and I had only just learned today's tide. A knock sounded like a pencil on a desk, polite, precise. Mrs. Whitcomb stood on the stoop with a paper sack of blueberry muffins and the air of a woman who watches neighborhoods the way gardeners watch weather. She set the bag in my hands and let her glance drift to the mailbox, then to my eyes. She tapped her temple, then traced 2 words on the sack with a golf pencil she kept behind her ear. Post office. Her mouth made a small warning I could read even without sound. I mouthed thanks and felt the meaning pass through me like a cold front. Somewhere behind my ribs, the day clicked into a new gear. Risk sharpened the edges. Mail redirection is a narrow channel that opens to wider water. Account hijacks, quiet authorizations, a signature applied where you are not. I left a neat errands note on the counter, tucked my veteran ID and a copy of the deed into a folder, and took every number that has ever mattered to this house. At the bank, the lobby ticked with the muted commerce of a small town. I asked to restore mail to my address, to place an alert on changes, to print a 60-day activity log, and to show me any powers of attorney on file. The manager returned with a copy stamped temporary POA. The signature looked like mine until it didn't. I always cross my T with a long bar. The bar here was short and impatient. The D in hail leaned the wrong way. Heat climbed my neck and I breathed through it the way I used to breathe through turbulence. I requested certified copies, filed a fraud alert, locked the mailing address, and noted the time, the teller ID, and the document number in my book. Paper makes teeth when you give it a jaw. In the parking lot, I called Dr. Kapoor and arranged a same-day cognitive screen, independent and simple, a baseline notarized and ready to travel. The test had nothing to prove to me. It existed for the day someone waved paper the way people wave flags. I asked the clinic to send results directly to my attorney and to keep a sealed copy on site. Mary Ann Klein answered on the second ring. I laid out the facts. She stacked them into steps. Revoke any non-consensual POA, file a notice that no at-home exams were permitted without my written approval, draft a will update with execution drafts within 48 hours. Her last instruction matched my instinct. Keep the facade long enough to widen the pattern. I agreed, wrote the plan in my notebook, and underlined it twice. I came home with the same careful gait and the same quiet face. Lila raised a note asking if I needed anything. I tapped Mint again and gave her a small smile that cost me more than I let on. In the study, I slid certified copies into a new manila folder and lettered it in block print. Mail/POA. Anomalies. Outside, the buoy bell counted its lazy measure. Inside, the furnace exhaled like a man relieved. The lighthouse blinked 6 on, 6 off. I told myself I would live at that tempo, patience, then action, until the water cleared and the bottom showed solid as ledge. Mary Ann Klein's office had the air of a ship kept in trim, a converted Victorian with floors that spoke quietly, lemon oil in the wood, tide charts framed above a metal filing cabinet that could have survived bad weather. I laid my folder on her desk and slid out each piece in order, bank change notices, a copy of the temporary POA, my incident diary with timestamps, the glossy Seabreeze Harbor Care brochure, and a photo of our wall calendar with a date circled red. She did not interrupt. She stacked each item on a legal pad, made 3 neat columns, and only then looked up as if citing a channel marker. "We'll handle this in 2 tracks," she said, pen poised, "Shield and Record." I nodded, grateful for language that matched the way my mind works. Shield meant revoking anything I hadn't signed, stopping any at-home exam I hadn't requested, and changing the will so the map matched the coastline I now traveled. Record meant preserving proof in forms that hold up when words start to buckle. Certified letters, notarized reports, chain of custody copies. She drafted while I watched, a revocation and repudiation of any POA not executed by me, a notice to Dr. Nolan Pierce in Seabreeze Harbor. Care forbidding evaluations or placement steps without my written consent, a litigation hold letter putting them on notice to preserve all communications regarding my condition and property. Then she opened a new file for my estate, the hinge squeaking like a hatch. I said what needed saying without embroidery. The house, savings, and investments to Aaron, to Lila, $1,500 for reasons she will understand. She suggested a letter of intent in my own straightforward phrasing, memorializing why I was changing course and when. We scheduled execution for late afternoon with her clerk and paralegal as witnesses and a notary on hand. From there, I drove to Dr. Priya Kapoor's clinic for a cognitive assessment to sit alongside yesterday's hearing results. She greeted me with a small smile that said she knew exactly why an independent benchmark mattered. We worked through orientation, recall, clock drawings, serial sevens. She watched my eyes as much as my hand, the way good evaluators do. "This is for the record," I said, and she answered, "Exactly." I asked that results be notarized, that a sealed copy remain at the clinic, and that a duplicate be couriered to Marianne under signature. By the time I left, the report was already moving faster than rumor. Back at Marianne's, proofs of mailing slid from a label printer like tickets. We added copies to a binder with the satisfying punch of a 3-hole. In the corner of her office, a paper shredder waited like a stern aunt. Nothing went there today. Everything stayed. "Keep the facade a little longer," she said as I buttoned my coat. "Patterns are persuasive." I thought of the lighthouse. Blink, darkness, blink. Pattern is how ships decide what a light means. On my way home, I stopped at the hardware store for a thick craft envelope and a broad tip marker. In my kitchen, I wrote "Estate Documents Personal" in letters even a nervous daughter couldn't miss, and slid inside a copy of the will's signature page and the letter of intent header. No values, no account numbers, just enough to mark a change in the weather. I set the envelope a little askew on the counter and settled in the living room with the newspaper held at a polite angle. The house's acoustics did the rest. Paper whispered across laminate, then tore. Silence absorbed a breath. "He changed everything," Lila said, the words ragged at the edges. A chair leg stuttered against tile. "We move up Pierce," Raphael replied, voice low and clipped. "We push the tour." "We contest as incompetence." I wrote their phrases with the time beside each. I did not write what I felt. Feelings don't notarize. The plan had always included a spark. I did not expect the flame to jump to radio so quickly. By mid-afternoon, Lila's caregiving video, the one with tidy captions and soft light, had taken a second wind online. The community station posted that she would join live to raise awareness. I parked by the wharf and tuned the dash to her voice. She told the county about burners left on, about wandering at night, about confusion around money. She said she was doing everything to keep Dad safe. A link scrolled on the station's page for donations toward home safety retrofits. I captured a screenshot, snapped the timestamp, and jotted every invented incident next to the minute mark they aired. Betrayal performed for strangers leaves a taste brighter than medicine. I wanted to call in to clear my name in the moment, but the case needed weight, not heat. At a cafe around the corner, I asked the station for an air check in writing and saved a PDF of the request to my binder. I changed passwords, added 2-factor authentication, and set bank alerts to chirp if anything so much as flinched. The Postal Service fraud portal opened a ticket for change of address abuse. The confirmation number went into the USPS/C OA folder I labeled with a ruler's edge. Marianne emailed scanned receipts for every certified letter and a short line, "Proof of service attached." That felt steadier than any argument I might have made on the air. At 4:45, under the steady hum of an old desk lamp, I signed the revised will in Marianne's conference room. The clerk and paralegal added their signatures with the careful attention of people who understand papers can outlast storms. The notary's stamp pressed down and came up clean. We appended my letter of intent, plain speech about boundaries and the reasons for them, and slid everything into a hard-sided envelope that made its own quiet when it closed. I left one sealed copy with Marianne and took one home, the weight of it as specific as a tool in a palm. Evening folded in over the harbor like a chart laid flat. In the kitchen, the planted envelope had done its work too well. I heard Lila call Pierce again, voice tight. "Tomorrow, then." Raphael's answer held impatience with a shine of fear. "We'll show the will is the product of decline." I wrote the line and set down my pen. Outside, the buoy bell answered some far-off motion of the tide. Inside, the furnace turned over, then leveled to its steady breath. I stood at the window and watched the lighthouse blink its 6-second message to whoever was paying attention. In my pocket, a small flash drive waited with the label I'd printed, "Air Check Request." Because evidence, like navigation, is a matter of redundancy. I finished the day's diary with one sentence. "Tomorrow they knock," I answer with daylight. Then I turned off the kitchen light and let the house hold still, a vessel at anchor in contested water, buttoned down and ready. If you're still watching and this moment has you thinking about loyalty and betrayal, type number 1 below so I know you're following. Let's continue. They arrived on the wind the way weather arrives. First the crunch of tires on my gravel, then voices braided too tightly, then the scrape of a briefcase clasp. I'd staged the room as if it were a chart table. Chair angled toward the kitchen threshold, incident diary open with a sharpened pencil across the spine, Dr. Kapoor's capacity note clipped inside a folder with Marianne's no consent letter on top. I set my face to the same quiet I'd worn all week, the look of a man listening with his eyes. The porch boards announced them. Raphael's cadence had a metallic edge, keyed too high for morning. Lila's sound shaped itself into care the way icing shapes itself into flowers, pretty and unnecessary. The third voice introduced itself with professional warmth, each syllable weighed before release. Dr. Nolan Pierce, I assumed, the man who could turn a kitchen table into a clinic if I let him. I did not let him. Not yet. We performed the opening ritual. Lila over-enunciated "Good morning," set down a tray, and slid me a card that read, "Tea and simple questions today." I wrote "Mint, please," and nodded as if relieved to have a plan. Pierce unpacked a thin folder and an embossed pen. He explained the screening in a voice meant to soothe. I wrote "Okay" and folded my hands. The test began in careful increments. What day is it? Where are we? What season? I wrote answers slowly enough to satisfy the story in the room without ceding any ground. Camden, Maine, my house, winter, Thursday. Word recall arrived in a trio of nouns. I wrote them twice, stacked like supplies on a dock. Commands followed. Touch your nose, draw a clock, count backward by sevens. I complied and let my pencil hesitate here and there to keep the pace drowsy. While I complied, I watched. Pierce's prompts wandered from the script in small ways, a leading phrasing about previous episodes, a suggestion that I often seem confused about appliances. Lila's hands fluttered answers into the space before mine could land, as if her certainty were evidence. Raphael occupied the doorway like a gate, shoulder set, eyes taking attendance of everyone's reactions. The house, faithful conspirator, offered me the aside I needed. Through the parlor seam, I caught Raphael's whisper thread a needle. If we mention the will change, that supports incompetence. Pierce, lower still, we can frame impairment given recent incidents. I didn't move. I let the words reach full shape and settle. Then I looked up and repeated them back, exactly as spoken, in a voice I had not used in front of them since the day the compressor blew. Silence took the room by the shoulders. It felt like the hush on a flight deck the moment before engines spool. I set my pencil aside. My hearing returned 2 days ago, I said, steady as a bearing. I have heard every word since. I opened the folder and placed Dr. Kapoor's notarized capacity note on the table where everyone could see the seal. Beneath it, I set Marianne's letter. No at-home evaluations, no placement steps, no actions without my written consent. Further questioning is withdrawn, I said. Anything gathered after this notice is non-consensual. Pierce's expression lost its varnish one flake at a time. He reached for jargon as for a handrail. Screening isn't determinative, differential diagnosis, best practices, but the letter in front of him cut those words off at the knee. Lila's face did something I had seen only when a childhood game went unexpectedly wrong. Confusion slid under fear. "Dad, we're trying to keep you safe," she said too quickly, the plural doing too much work. Raphael shifted to bluster. "This is about care," he said. "Paper doesn't change reality." "Paper records reality," I answered and glanced toward the doorbell camera in its little brass collar. "It also records handoffs." I said the time they had stepped onto the porch and the moment a small envelope traveled from Raphael's hand to Pierce's. I didn't show the clip. I didn't need to. The timestamp lived in my cloud and, more importantly, in my notes. A knock broke the stalemate. The door swung a foot and admitted Mrs. Whitcomb's careful posture, and beside her, Officer Harrell from the patrol, cap in hand. The officer's voice carried courtesy and procedure in equal measure. He was following up, he said, on a postal change of address investigation initiated under my name. Would I be willing to share doorbell footage from this morning that might show mail-related interactions at my residence? He checked his body cam time aloud, wrote it on a card, and waited. "Yes," I said. "I'll provide a copy." Mrs. Whitcomb gave a brief statement about having seen Raphael at the post office earlier in the week. She did not look at him when she said it. Pierce's jaw found a new angle. Raphael tried on vagueness and found it did not fit. Lila retreated to a chair and stared at the tabletop as if it had changed languages. Boundaries make their own gravity once named out loud. I stood, gathered the papers, and kept my tone even. "There will be no further in-home testing," I said. "No placement steps. Any communication about my health or property goes through Attorney Klein." I walked Pierce and Raphael to the door and logged their departure time in my diary. The pencil line straight as rigging. I handed Pierce a copy of the no consent notice for his file. To Raphael, I said only, "Any attempt to alter my mail or accounts is already documented and under inquiry." Adrenaline ebbed the way tide does, noticeable only after it's gone. My fingers trembled once as I set the kettle back on its trivet. The furnace drew a breath and released it, steadying the room. Relief did not feel like victory. It felt like a weight shifting off a rib that had begun without my noticing to ache all the time. The home I had defended stood where it had stood, but the air inside it had changed. You cannot unhear certain things. You can only choose where to stand now that you know them. Discipline after drama. I sat at the desk and wrote a memo to file in plain report style: who arrived when, what was said when consent was revoked, who witnessed the revocation when the officer entered, what he requested. I stapled Pierce's card to the page, printed a still from the doorbell clip with the time stamp along the bottom edge, and paperclipped the community radio aircheck request acknowledgement beneath. I emailed Marianne a bulleted timeline and the USPS contact, asked her to send preservation letters to the station and to Seabreeze, and offered to sign affidavits the next day. As evening reached into the harbor, I stood at the window where the lighthouse repeats its one idea. 6 seconds on, 6 off. A promise made by timing more than by brightness. I weighed my next turn. The angry route was clear enough. File every criminal complaint within the hour and let the locks click behind it. The harder route held to boundaries and left a narrow lane open for a mediated conversation with my daughter. I chose the helm over the horn. Hearing is a tool. Consent is the helm. I wrote the sentence in my diary, closed the cover, and let the house settle around it like a ship making peace with her anchor. Morning came without drama, the kind I prefer. Light sloped across the kitchen table, catching the edge of my notebook where last night's line, "Consent is the helm," sat like a ship's motto. Adrenaline had burned off, leaving a steadier fuel. 2 folders waited side by side on the desk: complaints, criminal and boundaries, civil. I knew I could run hot, file everything, let the locks do the talking. I also knew heat fogs the instruments. My aim was smaller and harder: protect the house, my name, and the choices I make inside my skin without anger steering the boat. I picked up a blank card, wrote "no actions without my consent, all contact through counsel," and taped it above the blotter where my eye would land first. Mary Ann moved quickly when I called. She packaged the principal into a system, a formal counsel-only channel notice to Lila, Raphael, Dr. Pierce, and Seabreeze, an invitation to third-party mediation with a licensed family therapist, a request for non-disparagement that covered social posts, radio claims, and any fundraising copy. We shaped a letter to Lila in my voice, firm without punishment. It explained my restored hearing and Dr. Kapoor's confirmation of capacity, revoked any purported POA, barred mail changes, and set conditions for meeting. Neutral site, written agenda, counsel present, no surprises. It asked for public correction of misleading statements and refunds to donors. When she read it back to me, it sounded the way Irene's good knots looked: tight, simple, testable. Most security work is unglamorous, which makes it perfect for a morning like this. The locksmith recored the cylinders. I rotated codes on the smart lock and mirrored the doorbell archive to a drive that does not talk to clouds. At the bank, I set daily threshold alerts and switched changes to in-person only. I named Aaron my trusted contact and reinstated paper statements because envelopes leave tracks. The postal inspector's portal took my affidavit. The clerk stamped my ID for future change of address blocks. None of it felt like paranoia, it felt like ballast under a loaded deck. Before feelings could demand tribute, I put the binder in order: index sheet, A, capacity, B, consent and notices, C, USPS/COA, D, banking, E, media. The air check request sat behind a timeline cover sheet numbered like a harbor chart. Exhibits gained spine when they lined up with tabs. I have learned that dignity can be rebuilt out of paper if the pages face the same direction. In the afternoon, I drafted a short note to the community radio's GM asking them to preserve the recording and provide a copy. I reserved comment pending counsel. For friends at church in the harbor, I wrote a single paragraph: "I'm fine, I'm handling matters privately, thanks for patience." I did not post. Silence kept its shape and asked nothing from me I wasn't willing to give. I set Irene's radio low to a standard station and let the brass grill warm under my palm. Her oldest counsel came back clean. Hold your line. The cost was inventory, not spectacle. Surprise, spoiled. Trust, fractured. Self-respect, intact. At the window, I counted the blink, 6 on, 6 off, and let my breathing follow. A gull rode the wind like a note held just long enough. The house sounded as it should. Furnace, clock, a faint tick in the parlor where the wood likes to talk in dry weather. Aaron picked up on the second ring. I kept the account clean. Hearing restored, legal shields up, mediation proposed, investigations moving. He offered to fly. I said, "Bad seas, wait for the tide," and asked him to serve as document custodian and emergency contact with the bank and clinic, 2 roles that make sense even if he never needs to use them. He understood. We did not waste words on outrage. We stored them like fuel in case the weather worsened. If I could anticipate my next move, I had to anticipate theirs. Mary Ann drafted preservation letters to the crowdfunding platform and templated a cease and desist for defamatory republication. We blocked recording at the mediation, allowed therapist notes, and set a 2-hour agenda with times printed in the margin the way you print departure windows under a barometer drop. Early next week, Rockland Counseling Suite, neutral room with a clock I can see. Outcomes sought. Public correction, donor refunds, written agreement on future contact. Anything else is improvisation, and improvisation is for music, not for this. Small housekeeping of the heart mattered too. I boxed the framed photos of Lila and slid them to the closet shelf, storage, not removal, and set a pair of neutral seascapes on the mantel beside Aaron's kids in their Halloween capes. The message was only to me. This home is open to anyone who honors the chart. A text from Lila arrived in the late afternoon, a mixture that smelled of apology and leverage. "We did it for safety, then. You'll be alone." I forwarded it to Marianne and did not reply. The card above the desk did the answering. "Consent is the helm." I held mine with both hands, not tight, but sure. By evening, the radio GM had acknowledged my request, the postal clerk had filed my affidavit, and Marianne had confirmations for certified mailings from yesterday's stack. The therapist offered a Tuesday slot. I accepted. I boiled water for tea the way I always do, cup warmed first, mint leaves bruised lightly to wake their oil. Outside, a colder wind stiffened the flag on the pier and dragged a slower measure from the buoy bell. I wrote the day's last line where I could find it tomorrow. I have chosen the lane. Tomorrow begins the work of holding it. Then I switched off the kitchen light and let the house set its own watch, steady as a vessel at anchor under a sky that pays no mind to men, and honest as a compass that has never once lied to me. Morning found the house quieter than any victory speech, which suited me. The furnace exhaled its low, even breath, and the buoy bell out past the breakwater told a slower measure under colder wind. On the desk, I drew a new date header in the incident diary, the graphite line straightening my shoulders as if it were a keel. Fatigue rode the edges of my hands, small tremor at the fingertips, nothing more. But the mind felt newly rinsed, like glass after rain. Consequences began to arrive the way tide does, not all at once, but undeniable. The community radio manager answered first, a careful email apologizing for delay and confirming that the broadcast had been placed under preservation. A downloadable copy would be prepared with timecode. I saved the PDF acknowledgement behind the media, broadcast tab, and noted the timestamp. Mid-morning, the clinic sent a neutral memo. Out-of-facility cognitive evaluations by Dr. Nolan Pierce were temporarily paused pending internal review. I filed that under capacity with the same dispassion I try to keep when tightening a bolt. The goal is not feeling, the goal is torque. At the harbor, nobody asked for a story and I was grateful. The tackle shop owner gave my shoulder a quick squeeze that said enough. A lobsterman tipped his cap without breaking stride. Back home, the town's digital square told a noisier tale. Two currents running against each other, one expressing sympathy and measured patience, the other amplifying Lila's caregiver narrative with sudden certainty. I took screenshots of representative posts, captured URLs and times, and placed them under media, posts. No replies. Silence keeps its shape only if you don't poke it. The postal inspector's voicemail was concise, almost kind. He requested a brief statement and any metadata from my doorbell camera I wished to share. I drafted a page of facts, date of mailbox anomaly, sighting reported by Mrs. Whitcomb, the bank's temporary POA copy with signature inconsistencies, the morning's front porch handoff. I offered to provide a clip and scheduled a window at the post office for in-person ID verification and a permanent block on change of address mischief. It felt less like an accusation than a tightening of seam tape before a storm. Rooms change when you reclaim them, even if the walls don't move. I walked the house with a rag and a steady mind. Safety signage. Lila had posted came down. The kitchen returned to its working layout. The lock cylinders stayed new and the smart codes rotated to fresh digits only I and Aaron knew. Pride edged everything, but so did grief. You can take a harbor back, I thought, but the buoys remember where they were dragged. By noon, 2 anonymous emails slipped under the door of my inbox. One promised I'd be exposed as senile, the other urged me to do the right thing for family. I saved headers, took screenshots, and forwarded both to Marianne with a short line, filed under evidence, harassment. No reply, no fuel to any fire, not of my choosing. Reputation requires trimming as much as sales do. I drafted a 3-sentence note for the church bulletin and the Lighthouse Museum. I am well, I am handling personal matters privately, and I am grateful for patience and kindness. An acquaintance invited me to tell my side on a local Facebook group. I declined and logged the invitation in the binder so I wouldn't be tempted later. The house hummed with the right kind of noise, clock tick, kettle hiss, the faintest chatter in the baseboard when heat expands the run. Then came the invitation that mattered more. The pastor's assistant asked if I would speak next Sunday on healthy family boundaries. I asked for time to consider and wrote the request into the diary so it wouldn't rattle around my head. An hour later, a different sort of olive branch slid in. Lila circulated a draft apology to me and to Marianne, admitting to exaggerations in distress, and proposing to refund donors if I withdrew the complaints against Dr. Pierce and the USPS inquiry. The apology read like a bargaining chip. I recognized the old rhythm, give with one hand, reclaim with the other, and forwarded it to Marianne, filed under Media. Corrections, proposed. Then stood at the sink and let the tap run until the water came truly cold. Restraint has a cost, so I paid it on paper. I copied my desk card, "Consent is the Helm," into the margin of a fresh page and wrote a one-line instruction to myself. No direct contact, counsel only. Under it, I listed what a real correction would require. Specific retractions on the same channels that carried the falsehoods, refunds to every donor, removal of the crowdfunding page, a plain apology naming the harm without qualifiers. The list steadied me the way a star fixes a navigator. Work of the unglamorous kind filled the afternoon. I exported a read-only copy of the doorbell clip for Officer Harrell and calculated a checksum to accompany it so the file would hold its integrity end to end. I printed the hash, stapled it to the submission form, and slid both into evidence, video. The radio's acknowledgement went behind the broadcast wall. I updated the master timeline to include each inbound response so that if I needed to see the day at a glance, it would be there. A clean line from event to event. Not all sustenance arrives in files. Near dusk, Mrs. Whitcomb left a thermos on the stoop with a sticky note that said, "Steady on." The chowder tasted like winter done right, hot, honest, a little pepper at the end, and it reminded me a person can be fed by kindness without owing a story in return. At the table, with Irene's radio low on a standard station, the house sounded like itself again. I boxed a few more of Lila's personal items, hairdryer, diffuser, a stack of glossy magazines, and labeled the carton with a neutral hand. Stored, not exiled. Boundaries aren't punishments, they're maps. I confirmed Tuesday's counseling suite appointment and asked the therapist for a formal structure. Timed agenda, no recordings, therapist notes only. I emailed Marianne a bullet list of outcomes I sought. Public correction, donor refunds, non-disparagement, a schedule for future contact, and a short column of items I would not negotiate. Consent, mail, property, estate. Night took the harbor in its familiar way. At the window, I watched the lighthouse repeat its single idea. 6 on, 6 off, a reliable promise that doesn't need adjectives. Fallout is weather, boundaries are the hull. I wrote the line at the bottom of the day's page and let the page close on it. Tomorrow would bring the radio station's formal reply, the postal meeting, the church's calendar, and letters that test the lines I have set. For now, the house held steady and I held my line. The day began with process instead of feeling, which was exactly what I wanted. I set the kettle on, drew a neat date header across my diary page, and squared the binder tabs until their colors lined like signal flags. Outside, the lighthouse kept its 6 on, 6 off promise. Inside, the house moved through its honest noises, the furnace's slow exhale, the clock's patient tick, each sound a metronome for paperwork. The intention was simple: translate boundaries into signed, dated outcomes. No speeches. Only paper that stands up when memory wobbles. The radio station wrote first. The general manager's email confirmed preservation of the segment and offered a link to the air check, time-coded and watermarked. An editor added a note acknowledging that unverified claims aired and are under review. I downloaded the file, ran a hash, saved the checksum beside it, and slid both into Media, broadcast. The manager offered me a live slot to provide context. I replied with a 90-word statement for them to read on air, vetted by counsel and stripped of heat, a correction without theater. It felt like setting a bearing rather than arguing about the weather. At the post office, the inspector greeted me with practical politeness and a clipboard. I presented ID, a utility bill for residency, and a drive containing the doorbell clip and checksum. He explained the process without drama. The change of address would be permanently blocked. Absent my in-person signature, the case would be referred to mail fraud investigators if the evidence supported it. I signed a concise statement and took the case number on a card that felt heavier than its weight. Procedure steadied my hands the way a deck rail steadies knees in chop. Back home, I filed copies under USPS/COA and added a short line to the timeline. Block confirmed. Referral opened. The counseling suite sent its frame like a flight plan. Tuesday, 10 a.m., therapist controls the floor, no recordings, counsel present, 2-hour timed agenda. I replied with outcomes listed in 5 clean bullets. Public correction on the same channels, donor refunds processed, non-disparagement moving forward, future contact schedule, explicit acknowledgement of my capacity and consent. Then I drafted a 2-sentence opening and copied it onto a card. My hearing is restored. My capacity is independently verified. We will resolve this by written corrections, refunds, and a boundary agreement. All future decisions about my health and home remain mine. I practiced saying it once, then stopping. The stopping mattered most. Marianne refreshed the legal packet by afternoon. Dr. Kapoor's finalized capacity report, notarized and dated, proof of service receipts for the preservation letters to the station, the crowdfunding platform, and Seabreeze, and a draft settlement memo template with signature lines and an enforcement clause. I 3-hole punched and tabbed everything under capacity and consent notices, rehearsing where each document sat in the binder so I wouldn't fumble on Tuesday. Preparation is a form of kindness to your future self. Lila's attorney replied with what sounded like a compromise and read like a lever. Mutual walkback was the phrase. She would post a soft clarification and process partial refunds if I withdrew the postal complaint and any complaint regarding Dr. Pierce. I forwarded it to Marianne without commentary and logged the time. Our counter went out an hour later, full correction on the channels used to make the claims, full donor refunds, explicit acknowledgement of capacity, non-disparagement moving forward. In return, we offered no public shaming and a structured framework for future contact. Boundaries are clearest when nouns do the work and adjectives go hungry. The church reached out next. The pastor confirmed a slot 2 Sundays out for a talk on healthy family boundaries. I asked that it remain non-personal, principles, not anecdotes, and received an encouraging reply. A quiet public vote of confidence landed in the afternoon when the Lighthouse Museum posted a 1-sentence note. Docent Ned Hale resumes full schedule. I printed a screenshot and filed it under Media, Community. Trust rebuilds best in small workmanlike gestures. Evidence likes redundancy. I exported a read-only copy of the air check to the offline drive and printed transcript excerpts with the exact timestamps where certain claims were made, marking each line in the margin for future correction language. I built a 1-page mediation exhibit list, simple and blunt. A. Capacity. B. Broadcast transcript highlights. C. Crowdfunding page captures. D. USPS/COA case receipt. E. No consent letters. I slid it into the front sleeve of the binder so I could find my place if hands shook. For a moment, the urge to narrate the hurt rose like steam. I let it lift and vanish. I am not here to be believed. I am here to be clear, I said aloud once to the empty room, and Irene's radio answered with a gentle hiss as the tubes held their warmth. I remembered her fixing a line without commentary and handing me the coil. Work first, talk later. Practical safety rounded out the afternoon. I confirmed building access for Tuesday, checked parking, and decided where the binder would rest on the table so I could see the door and keep the sun at my back. My phone went to Do Not Disturb, emergency contact pinned to Aaron. I put copies of my ID and case numbers in a slim secondary folder and zipped both into the brief bag. Redundancy again. Weather changes. Late in the day, the crowdfunding platform's trust team wrote to acknowledge Marianne's preservation letter. They requested my statement of harm and any links to corroboration. I sent a tight account, dates, claims aired, capacity report, air check timestamps, and nothing else. No epithets, no biography. Facts make their own weather. A new ticket number joined the others in the binder. I called Aaron with the day's brief, USPS case number, radio correction draft, mediation time, my opening statement on a card. He offered to drive up anyway. "Stand by," I said. "No heroics in bad seas." He laughed, short and warm, and promised to keep copies synced and his phone on. Night came down clean. I tucked the card with my 2 sentences into the binder's front cover and set the bag by the door the way sailors set boots under a bunk. The house exhaled, steady as a hull resting in its berth. At the window, the lighthouse blinked without rush. I wrote one line at the bottom of the diary page: "Tomorrow is logistics, Tuesday is clarity," and closed the book on a day that had asked for no speeches and gotten exactly what it needed: paper, process, and a course held true. I measured the morning by simple checks instead of feelings. Phone on Do Not Disturb with Marianne and Aaron whitelisted, binder zipped with tabs aligned like signal flags, air check and transcript excerpts mirrored to the offline drive, thermos filled, 2 granola bars in the side pocket. The card with my 2 sentences sat under the clear sleeve of the binder's cover. Outside, the lighthouse kept its 6 on, 6 off pulse. I told myself the day would be judged by signed outcomes, not anyone's face. The counseling suite was purpose-built to be forgettable. Neutral walls, framed watercolors that offended no one, a clock whose hands moved at a pace that discouraged speeches. Tissues lived in a square box at the table's center like a warning and a promise. Marianne sat to my left, her legal pad parallel to the table edge. Across from me, Lila and her counsel arranged pens in lines too tidy to be natural. Raphael took the end chair and stared at the seam in the carpet. The therapist set the frame: timed agenda, controlled floor, no recordings, counsel present. I read the card once, exactly as written. My hearing is restored, my capacity is independently verified. We will resolve this by written corrections, refunds, and a boundary agreement. All future decisions about my health and home remain mine. I set the card down and folded my hands. There is power in the discipline of stopping. The room tested the silence. The clock obliged by moving. Marianne produced the exhibit list and walked it like a checklist. A. Capacity report notarized and dated. B. Broadcast transcript highlights with timestamps. C. Crowdfunding page captures. D. USPS case receipt and COA block confirmation. E. No consent letters served to Dr. Pierce and Seabreeze. She slid each document to the center, turned it so the text faced neutral, and named its purpose without commentary. The therapist nodded after each, a metronome of attention. Lila's counsel tracked timestamps with a pencil. Raphael's foot tapped once and went still. When it was their turn, Lila reached for story. Stress, fear, the slippery logic of doing our best. The therapist redirected to claims and consequences. The transcript lines did not care about mood. They displayed themselves in plain type. On the second page, Lila's shoulders dropped a notch. "I overstated," she said. It was not a confession, it was a fact in air. The therapist let the air stay still. We moved to terms. The settlement took shape the way a good chart does: names, lines, distances. A public correction would be read on the same radio program and posted on Lila's channels within 48 hours. Language would acknowledge that specific statements about burners, wandering, and confusion were inaccurate. It would state plainly that my capacity is intact and that decisions about my health and home are mine. Full refunds to donors would be processed. The platform would be notified to freeze funds until completion. A mutual, forward-looking, non-disparagement clause would bind us. Future contact would occur by email or through counsel on a predictable schedule. No surprise visits, no access to mail, finances, or medical evaluations. The therapist checked comprehension after each point. The counsels initialed in the margin where the ink could catch. Raphael's lane ran to accountability, not negotiation. He agreed to provide a written statement to the postal inspector acknowledging he had no authorization to file any change of address on my behalf, and he undertook not to handle my mail. Dr. Pierce existed at a professional distance. His employer's internal review would proceed without my input, and he would have no further contact with me. Those lines belonged in the memo too, small but structural, like ribs under a deck. The printer hummed. Paper came out warm. The therapist read the enforcement clause, the one that makes a promise more than a wish, stating that breach would trigger stipulated remedies, including injunctive relief and fee shifting. We signed and dated. Copies were collated with a care that belonged at libraries and in courtrooms. I slid mine into the binder and made a new top tab with the little labeler the suite kept for exactly this purpose. Settlement, executed. The word looked like a mooring line tightened to working tension. On the sidewalk afterward, the air tasted cleaner than it had any right to. I leaned against a low granite planter and drank mint tea from the thermos. My hands were steady. Relief arrived as an absence, like the weight taken off a rib I hadn't noticed aching. Marianne squeezed my elbow and said nothing, which was better than any epigram. We parted at the curb. I walked to the truck with the binder pressed against my side like a tool you don't wave around. Implementation moved with an efficiency that reminded me of the Navy at its best. The radio station read our 90-word correction during the afternoon community segment and emailed me the archived clip. I downloaded it, ran a hash, and filed it beside the original aircheck. The crowdfunding platform froze the campaign and posted notice to donors that refunds would follow within the week. Lila's public post appeared 30 minutes later with the agreed language and no embroidery. I printed PDFs, marked timestamps, and filed them in the order they arrived. It felt like tightening bolts after a storm, workmanlike, necessary, done. Community is a quiet animal when it's healthy. The Lighthouse Museum posted a photo of me pointing at the Fresnel lens and explaining how prisms bend light to carry farther in fog. The caption was simple: Docent Ned Hale resumes full schedule. Comments stacked in gentle phrases that did not demand a reply. The church bulletin added my upcoming talk on boundaries labeled Principles Not Personal Stories. 2 texts arrived from Harbor friends. Glad you're steady? I filed nothing. I let the messages sit like anchors that required no inspection. Home recognized me differently that evening. I shelved the binder and ran my hand over Irene's radio. A low tune climbed from the tubes and settled into the room as if it had been waiting for permission. The floorboards no longer braced themselves under my step. I made a simple supper and ate it without narrating anything to myself. The house sounded true again, furnace, clock, the distant buoy bell counting a lazy measure under the slacker tide. I wrote one line at the bottom of the diary page to close the day. Closure is paperwork and practice. Not a verdict, not a victory lap, a maintenance schedule for a life I am still responsible to steer. Then I set my pen down, turned off the kitchen light, and stood a moment at the window while the lighthouse delivered its patient arithmetic to anybody still out there looking for home. Morning opened with the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be named. The house moved through its small, honest sounds, the furnace's measured breath, the clock's modest tick, and I let them set the pace. The binder lived on the shelf now, spine outward, as plain as a dictionary. Irene's radio warmed under my palm and hummed a low station that favored standards, not because I needed nostalgia, but because those songs understood tempo. Outside, the lighthouse blinked its arithmetic on the winter air. Closure wasn't an event, it was a posture. I would spend this day distilling what should endure and shelving the rest. I began with a letter to Aaron. I kept it shorter than I first wanted and clearer than I thought I could. I wrote what happened in a few sentences, not for the record was already thick, but so my son would have the shape of it from me. I explained what changed, corrections posted, refunds underway, boundaries signed. I wrote what matters going forward. My decisions are mine. Help is welcome when it stays inside consent. Respect is not a formality but a bearing. I left practical notes in the margin, where the will copy lives, which drawer holds the key list, who to call at the bank and clinic, and ended with a line that sounded like both of us. We keep each other informed, not managed. When I sealed the envelope, it felt like tucking a chart back into its sleeve after a clean trip. Then I drafted the talk for church. The title came easy: Kindness with a Helm. I promised myself I would not use names, places, or the small drama that invites applause for pain. 3 principles fit on one page. First, kindness is strength, consent is direction. Second, boundaries protect dignity and relationships. Without them, love tips into permission for harm. Third, documentation is not distrust, it's stewardship, the way a log keeps a ship honest. Under each, I wrote a sentence and an ordinary example, because people carry examples home better than they carry declarations. I practiced a short closing thought aloud once and set the paper down. Speeches are better when they end a sentence sooner than your lungs prefer. At the church hall, the pastor kept his introduction to 2 sentences and a smile. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. I spoke without hurry and kept my eyes on the back row where, years ago, Irene used to sit when she needed an exit near the door. A few lines earned nods I did not try to collect. The phrase "silence with shape" landed the way a steady hand lands on a shoulder. When I finished, the applause sounded like gratitude instead of noise. An elderly man stopped me near the bulletin board and said, "Thank you for giving words to something I felt." We didn't trade stories. We traded a look that said we knew what we meant. Afterward, I walked my shift at the Lighthouse Museum. A child asked why the light blinks instead of staying bright all the time. I explained timing and recognition, how a pattern tells you where you are before you reach the rocks. "So the blink is the message," he said. I told him he had it exactly right. The room smelled of lemon oil and brass polish. The model lens scattered a small rainbow onto the wall. The town recalibrated around me in the way good communities do, without spectacle, by letting you work. Through Marianne, I sent a note to Lila that was neither a door nor a wall. I wrote that I accept the public correction and the refunds as actions, not absolution. That I hope she would grow from actions rather than explanations. That future contact stays exactly as agreed, scheduled, written through counsel when needed, no surprises at the door. Mercy, I'm learning, is choosing proportion over revenge. The letter cost less than anger and bought more than silence. It did not rewrite what happened. It simply set where the edge of the page must be. Back at the house, I finished the last small resets. The safety sticker on the stove dial went into the trash with a sound no one else would have noticed. I carried the box of Lila's items to the labeled shelf and left it there without commentary. I hung a small card in a simple frame above the desk. Consent is the helm, and polished Irene's radio until the brass caught a square of afternoon sun. On the last page of the incident diary, I wrote a final notation, "All stations normal," and closed it. The book had done its job. It did not need to become a relic. I tried to name the lessons aloud, not as commandments, but as tools. Love without boundaries morphs into permission. Mine won't. Hearing is a sense. Listening is a practice. One I intend to keep even when I don't like what I hear. Paperwork, done right, is an instrument of dignity. I will not apologize for keeping records that keep me upright. Mercy does not erase consequences. It steers them into lanes that let people learn. Each line had a counterweight from the months behind me, a place where the words had been earned rather than invented. Before dusk, I walked down to the harbor and stood where the boardwalk meets the ramp. The tide lay back in loose sheets and the bell rolled a soft measure like a breath remembered. Gulls idled in the wind, not searching, not arguing, simply balancing. I timed 2 full cycles of the lighthouse. 6 on, 6 off. Irene had said, "Hold your line." So often it might as well have been carved on our headboard. I stood there long enough to feel the phrase settle in my shoulders again. I mailed the letter to Aaron at the blue box by the bait shop and let the lid echo like a punctuation mark. On my phone, I booked a Seattle visit for early spring and confirmed the dates for the museum and the church talk. I checked the door once at home, not out of fear but out of habit, and found it exactly as I left it. The house held its trim, the radio hummed, the window caught the lighthouse blink and tossed it back like a signal returned. In the end, restoration wasn't a roar, it was a choice repeated on ordinary days. Dignity came from clear boundaries and mercy from proportion, not softness. Paperwork became a promise to the self. Silence, a shape you keep. When storms pass, you don't celebrate the wind. You check the lines, set your helm, and go on. If this resonated, share your thoughts below, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe with notifications on. Your voice keeps this community steady.